Life on our ranch had always been peaceful. Every morning, the sun would rise over our rolling hills, painting the weathered fence posts golden. My son Danny would race outside to help with the chores, his eyes bright with the kind of joy that only comes from living close to the land. Danny was 12 years old and had grown up understanding that raising livestock meant responsibility. He knew how to move quietly around the animals, how to read their moods, and most importantly, how to respect their power. Thunder, our magnificent fighting bull, was not just an animal to us. He represented years of careful breeding and training for exhibitions at county fairs. Thunder was not trained for violence. He was trained for controlled demonstrations of strength and discipline. When Danny worked near his pen, the bull would often come to the fence, almost like he was checking on the boy. There was a bond there, built on mutual respect and daily care. Our small rural community had always operated on simple principles. Everyone knew everyone. Property lines were respected. Neighbors helped neighbors. We had lived here for 3 generations, and the land meant everything to us. Danny could hardly contain his excitement about the upcoming county fair. "Dad, Thunder is going to be amazing this year," he would say, brushing the bull's coat until it gleamed. "Everyone is going to see how strong and smart he is." I watched my son work with Thunder and felt proud. This was what childhood should look like. Learning responsibility, developing character, understanding the natural world. Danny was growing into a fine young man, and our ranch was the perfect place for that growth. Then Karen arrived. Her pristine black SUV kicked up dust clouds as she pulled into the driveway of the property next to ours. She stepped out wearing designer clothes that looked completely out of place in our rural setting. Even from a distance, I could see her surveying our property with obvious disgust. Karen had moved from the city, and she brought all of her urban attitudes with her. Within hours of her arrival, she was complaining to anyone who would listen about our dangerous animals and how our ranch was destroying property values. I tried to be neighborly. I walked over to introduce myself and welcome her to the community. "Hi there," I said with a smile. "I am your neighbor. If you need anything or have questions about the area, please let me know." Karen looked at me like I was something she had scraped off her shoe. "I need you to get rid of that dangerous bull," she said, pointing toward Thunder's pen. "I have a right to feel safe in my own home." I explained that Thunder was a trained exhibition animal, that we had proper permits, and that our ranch had been operating legally for decades. Karen was not interested in facts. She was only interested in getting her way. "I do not care about your permits," she snapped. "That thing is a lawsuit waiting to happen. I am not going to stand for it." That first confrontation set the tone for everything that followed. Karen saw our way of life as inferior and dangerous. She could not understand that rural communities operated differently than city neighborhoods. To her, we were just ignorant country people who needed to be controlled and corrected. The cultural divide was clear from the start. We valued tradition, respect, and living in harmony with the land. Karen valued control, compliance, and having everything conform to her expectations. She had an HOA mentality in a place where HOAs did not exist. As the days passed, Karen made it clear that she considered our ranch a personal threat to her comfort and safety. She would stand at our property line, arms crossed, glaring at Thunder like he was a monster instead of a well-trained animal. Danny noticed her hostility but tried to ignore it. "Why does she not like Thunder, Dad?" he asked one evening. "Some people fear what they do not understand, son," I replied. "But that does not make their fears our problem." I had no idea how wrong I was about that. Karen wasted no time turning her complaints into action. Within a week of moving in, she was filing complaints with county officials about our unsafe farming practices. She had no legal grounds for these complaints, but that did not stop her from trying. The county inspector who came out was apologetic. "I am sorry to bother you folks," he said, reviewing our permits and facilities. "Everything here is completely legal and up to code. I had to respond to the complaint, but there is nothing wrong with your operation." Karen was not satisfied with the official response. She began organizing other newer residents who had moved to our area from the city. She created a petition to ban livestock from our agricultural zone, despite the fact that agriculture was the entire purpose of the zoning designation. Most of our longtime neighbors ignored her petition, but a few newer residents signed it. These were people who had moved to the country for the scenery, but did not want to deal with the realities of rural life. Karen found her supporters among these transplants who wanted country living without country responsibilities. The situation escalated when Karen started taking photos and videos of our property from the road. She would park her SUV at the edge of our driveway and document our daily activities like she was building a case against us. Every time Danny and I did our morning chores, she was there with her phone, recording everything. "She is watching us like we are criminals," Danny said one morning, clearly uncomfortable with the constant surveillance. "Just ignore her, son," I advised. "We are not doing anything wrong." But ignoring Karen proved impossible. She began confronting us directly whenever we were visible on our own property. She would march up to our fence line and start shouting demands. "That bull needs to be removed immediately," she would yell. "I have contacted my lawyer, and you are going to face serious legal consequences if anything happens." I tried to remain calm during these confrontations. I explained our agricultural rights, our proper permits, and the fact that Thunder had never caused any problems in all the years we had owned him. Karen was not interested in facts. She was only interested in winning. "I do not care about your so-called rights," she would snap. "I have rights too, and my rights include living without fear of dangerous animals next door." The confrontations became increasingly personal and venomous. Karen began attacking not just our livestock operation but our character, our intelligence, and our right to live on our own land. What disturbed me most was when Karen started targeting Danny directly. If she saw him near the fence line doing his chores, she would begin yelling at him specifically. This was an adult woman screaming at a 12-year-old boy for taking care of animals he loved. "You should not be around that dangerous bull," she would shout at Danny. "Your father is putting you in danger, and someone needs to call Child Protective Services." The threats against Danny crossed a line that should never be crossed. Watching my son's confusion and hurt when this woman screamed at him for simply living his life filled me with a rage I had never experienced before. Danny tried to be brave about it, but I could see the harassment was affecting him. He became more cautious around our property, always looking over his shoulder to see if Karen was watching. A child should not have to live that way. The final straw in this phase came when Karen called animal control with false reports of animal abuse and neglect. The animal control officer who responded was someone we had worked with before during routine inspections. "I have to investigate every complaint," he explained, "but I can see your animals are well cared for. Someone is making false reports, and that is actually illegal." I asked him to document that the reports were false, which he did. But Karen was not deterred by the truth. She continued calling different agencies, filing more complaints, and spreading lies about our ranch throughout the community. The harassment created a suffocating atmosphere of constant surveillance and suspicion. Every day brought new threats, new complaints, and new attempts to destroy our livelihood. Karen had transformed from annoying neighbor to active enemy, and she was using every tool at her disposal to destroy us. I began to realize that this was not just about thunder or livestock permits. This was about power and control. Karen believed that her money and connections gave her the right to dictate how everyone else should live. She was conducting a systematic campaign to force us off our own land. The pressure was building like steam in a kettle. I knew that something had to give, but I had no idea how explosive that release would be. The morning of April 15th started like any other. Danny and I were moving Thunder to a different pasture for fresh grazing, a routine task we had performed hundreds of times. The spring air was crisp and clean, and Thunder was calm and cooperative as we led him along the familiar path. Danny walked beside me, chatting about school and his plans for the county fair. He had been practicing his presentation about responsible livestock management, and his enthusiasm was infectious. These moments with my son were precious to me, simple father-son time that formed the foundation of our relationship. That peaceful morning shattered the moment Karen appeared at our fence line. She was in her typical aggressive state, arms crossed, face twisted with anger. "I am sick of this," she shouted across the pasture. "You people think you can do whatever you want, but I am not going to stand for it anymore." Danny and I exchanged glances. We had learned to expect these outbursts, but they still disrupted our daily routine and created tension where none should exist. "Just keep working, son," I said quietly. "We are not doing anything wrong." Danny nodded and continued guiding Thunder toward the new pasture. He was getting good at ignoring Karen's harassment, but I could see the stress in his shoulders. No child should have to develop that kind of defensive posture. Karen was not satisfied with just shouting from a distance. As we worked, she began looking around the ground, picking up rocks and debris. My blood ran cold as I realized what she was planning to do. "Stop," I called out as Karen began throwing rocks and debris at Thunder. Thunder had been calm and docile moments before, but being pelted with stones triggered his defensive instincts. The massive bull began moving restlessly, his head lowered, clearly agitated by the unprovoked attack. Danny immediately moved to calm Thunder, staying safely outside the pen but speaking in the gentle voice he always used with the animals. "Easy, boy," he said. "It is okay, Thunder. Everything is okay." Karen saw Danny near the fence and something snapped in her mind. Later, I would realize that she had been building toward this moment for weeks, looking for any excuse to escalate the conflict to a level where she could claim we were truly dangerous. "Get away from that fence," she screamed at Danny. "I am going to teach you people a lesson." That was when Karen made the decision that changed everything. She grabbed the fence posts and began shaking them violently, trying to demonstrate how supposedly unsafe our fencing was. The old wooden post she chose had been weathered by years of exposure to the elements. Under normal circumstances, it would have held for years longer. But under the violent shaking from someone intent on proving a point, the wood began to splinter. "Ma'am, please stop," I called out, seeing what was about to happen. Karen ignored me completely. She was in a rage, shaking that fence post with all her strength, determined to prove that our property was dangerous and that we were negligent ranchers. The post gave way with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the entire ranch. Danny had been standing near the fence, trying to keep Thunder calm during Karen's attack. When the fence post collapsed, it created a gap that sent Danny stumbling backward. He tried to catch himself, but his foot caught on a rock, and he fell backward onto the rocky ground behind him. Time seemed to slow down as I watched my son fall. I could see every detail with horrible clarity. The way his arms reached out to break his fall, the look of surprise and fear on his face, the angle at which his leg twisted as he hit the ground. The sound of Danny's leg breaking was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was a sharp, wet snap that cut through the morning air like a gunshot. The sound was followed immediately by my son's screams of pain, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I ran to Danny as fast as I could, but those few seconds felt like hours. My son was lying on the rocky ground, his leg twisted at an impossible angle, tears streaming down his face as he cried out in agony. "Danny, oh God, Danny!" I knelt beside him, afraid to move him but desperate to help somehow. Instead of showing any concern for the child she had just injured, Karen immediately began shouting blame at us. "This is your fault," she screamed, pointing her manicured finger in our direction. "You people are dangerous. Your unsafe fencing hurt that boy. I am going to sue you for everything you have." I looked at this woman in complete disbelief. She had just caused a serious injury to my child through her own reckless actions, and her first response was to threaten us with lawsuits. She showed no remorse, no concern for Danny's suffering, no acknowledgement of her own responsibility. "You did this," I shouted back at her. "You shook that fence post until it broke." "I was proving how unsafe your property is," Karen yelled back. "This just shows how right I was. You people should not be allowed to have animals or children around here." Danny was still crying in pain, his leg clearly broken, and this woman was standing over us making threats about lawsuits and proving points. It was a level of callousness that I could not comprehend. That was the moment everything changed for me. Up until that point, I had tried to be reasonable, to be the bigger person, to handle Karen's harassment with patience and restraint. But watching my son suffer because of her reckless actions, while she stood there playing the victim, destroyed any possibility of peaceful resolution. Karen had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She had hurt my child and shown no remorse. In that moment, as I knelt beside Danny trying to comfort him, I knew that this woman understood only one thing: consequences. The ride to the hospital was a nightmare of sirens and Danny's cries of pain. I held his hand while the paramedics worked to stabilize his leg, whispering reassurances that I was not sure I believed myself. The X-rays revealed what we had feared: a compound fracture that would require surgery and months of recovery. The doctor explained that Danny would need metal pins to hold the bone together while it healed. "He is going to be okay," the surgeon assured me, "but this is a serious injury. He will need extensive physical therapy, and full recovery could take 6 months or more." As if the situation were not traumatic enough, Karen followed us to the hospital. She appeared in the emergency room waiting area and continued her harassment even while my son was in surgery. "I want to speak to the hospital administrator," she demanded at the reception desk. "That family is dangerous, and I need to file a report about unsafe conditions that led to this accident." The nurse looked at her with obvious confusion. "Ma'am, you are not family. You cannot file reports about other patients." Karen was not deterred. She began buttonholing anyone who would listen, trying to spin the story in her favor. She claimed that our unsafe fencing had caused the accident and that she had been trying to help by pointing out the danger. When the police arrived to take statements, Karen's story kept changing. First, she said she had been walking by and noticed the unsafe fence. Then she said she had been trying to warn us about the danger. Finally, She admitted to touching the fence but claimed she was only trying to test its stability. The police officer took notes with obvious skepticism. "So you were on their property shaking their fence posts?" he asked. "I was documenting safety violations," Karen replied. "I had every right to inspect that fence for community safety." "You had no right to be on their property or to damage their fence," the officer corrected her. But Karen had already hired an expensive lawyer, and within days, she filed countersuits claiming that we were dangerous and liable for her emotional trauma from witnessing the accident she had caused. Our insurance company began investigating, but Karen's legal team flooded them with fabricated evidence and witness statements from people who had not even been present. She had resources that seemed unlimited, while we faced mounting medical bills and legal fees. Danny faced months of physical therapy and would miss the entire school sports season he had been looking forward to. The boy who had been so excited about showing Thunder at the county fair was now confined to a hospital bed with a shattered leg. "Will I be able to help with Thunder again?" Danny asked me one afternoon, his voice small and worried. "Of course you will, son," I promised him. "You are going to heal up good as new." But privately, I wondered if we would even have Thunder much longer. Karen's legal assault was designed to destroy our livelihood entirely. She wanted us gone, and she was using every weapon at her disposal to make that happen. The mounting legal bills created financial pressure that threatened not just our emotional well-being, but our ability to keep the ranch. Karen's lawyers were attacking from every angle, claiming that our livestock operation was inherently dangerous and should be shut down. Meanwhile, Karen herself seemed to revel in her perceived victory. I would see her driving past our property slowly, apparently enjoying the sight of our distress. She had hurt my child and was now trying to destroy our family's livelihood, all while playing the victim. The hospital became a second home for us during Danny's recovery. Between surgeries and physical therapy appointments, I watched my son struggle with pain and disappointment, while Karen's harassment continued through legal channels. Every beeping monitor, every medical procedure, every physical therapy session served as a reminder of the real harm caused by one person's entitlement and aggression. Danny's brave face during medical procedures broke my heart, while highlighting the innocence destroyed by adult conflicts. The legal system that was supposed to protect honest citizens had become another weapon in Karen's arsenal. Her wealth and connections allowed her to twist justice into injustice, to make the victims into the accused. As I sat beside Danny's hospital bed, watching him sleep fitfully despite the pain medication, I realized that being right was not enough. Playing by the rules was not enough. Sometimes, when the system fails to protect the innocent, other forms of justice become necessary. Weeks passed with Danny in a cast, unable to participate in the normal activities that made childhood joyful. He could not run, could not help with the ranch work he loved, and could not even walk without crutches. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to celebrate her victory by becoming even bolder in her harassment. She began trespassing on our property regularly, claiming she had a legal right to inspect for safety violations. When I confronted her about the trespassing, she would wave legal documents and claim her lawyers had given her permission. "I have every right to document ongoing safety hazards," she would say, taking photos of our equipment and facilities. "This is all going to be evidence in court." Karen's confidence had grown to the point of arrogance. She believed she was untouchable, protected by her lawyers and her perceived moral authority. She walked around our property like she owned it, taking notes and making demands. During this time, I discovered that Karen had been spreading lies throughout the community, trying to turn our neighbors against us. She told people that we were negligent ranchers who put children at risk. She claimed that Danny's accident proved how dangerous our operation was. Some of the newer residents believed her stories, but the longtime neighbors who knew us defended our reputation. The community began to divide between those who knew the truth and those who believed Karen's propaganda. My research into Karen's background revealed disturbing patterns. In her previous city neighborhood, she had waged similar harassment campaigns against multiple neighbors. She had filed lawsuits against a family with a swimming pool, claiming it was a public hazard. She had tried to force another neighbor to remove a tree because it blocked her view. Karen was a serial harasser who had destroyed other lives before targeting ours. This was not about thunder or legitimate safety concerns. This was about power and control. Karen was addicted to forcing other people to comply with her demands. The final straw came when Karen parked her pristine black SUV directly on our property line, blocking access for our farm equipment. When I asked her to move it, she refused. "I am parked on a public easement," she lied. "You have no right to tell me where I can park." There was no public easement. She was clearly on our property, but she knew that calling the police would take hours, and that by then she could move her vehicle and claim she had been somewhere else. That evening, as I sat watching Thunder in his pen, something clicked in my mind. Karen feared our bull more than anything else. Despite all her bluster and legal threats, she gave Thunder a wide berth whenever she was on our property. She was afraid of him. Thunder represented everything Karen could not control. He was powerful, unpredictable to her city-trained mind, and completely unimpressed by her money or status. When she looked at Thunder, she saw her own helplessness. For months, I had been playing defense against Karen's attacks. I had been trying to be reasonable, to follow the rules, to handle her harassment through proper channels. But the proper channels had failed. The system designed to protect honest citizens had been corrupted by someone with more money and fewer scruples. As I watched Thunder move through his pen with controlled power, I began to realize that Karen's fear of him could become her weakness. She had been using our patience and reasonableness against us, but she had no defense against something she could not understand or control. Thunder was trained for exhibitions, trained to respond to aggressive energy and sudden movements with controlled power. He had never hurt anyone because he had never been put in a situation where his training and instincts aligned with justice. But Karen's own aggressive behavior, her trespassing, her property damage, her complete disregard for boundaries, all of these actions could create the perfect storm where Thunder's natural responses would teach her the consequences she had never faced before. I began planning carefully, thinking through every detail. This could not be revenge. It had to be natural consequences. Karen would have to create the situation herself through her own illegal actions. I would simply be in the right place at the right time to document what happened. Karen's pattern of behavior was predictable. She would continue escalating, continue trespassing, continue pushing boundaries because she believed herself untouchable. Eventually, she would push too far, and Thunder would respond the way any powerful animal responds to aggressive, threatening behavior. The plan that formed in my mind was simple. Let Karen be Karen. Let her continue her harassment, her trespassing, her property damage. But next time, instead of trying to stop her or reason with her, I would simply document everything and let natural consequences take their course. Sometimes justice needs a little help, and sometimes that help comes in the form of 1,200 pounds of muscle and horns, trained to respond to aggression with overwhelming force. Karen had taught me that playing by the rules was not enough. Now it was time for her to learn that some rules cannot be broken without consequences. The day of reckoning arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Karen drove up to our property in her pristine black SUV, parking it directly on our land in clear violation of trespassing laws. She stepped out wearing her typical designer outfit, surveying our ranch like she owned it. I was ready for her. I had my phone positioned to document everything that happened, and I had positioned myself strategically near Thunder's pen where I could observe the entire confrontation. Karen began her usual screaming routine, pointing at various aspects of our property and making demands. "This whole operation needs to be shut down," she yelled. "I have had enough of living next to dangerous animals and negligent people." I remained calm, continuing to film her illegal trespassing and aggressive behavior. Every word she spoke, every action she took, was being recorded as evidence of her harassment and criminal trespassing. "Ma'am, you are on my property without permission," I said calmly. "I need you to leave immediately." "I do not have to leave," Karen snapped back. "I have every right to inspect this hazardous operation. My lawyer said so." That was a lie, and we both knew it. No lawyer would tell a client they had the right to trespass on private property. But Karen had become so accustomed to getting her way through intimidation that she believed her own lies. As Karen continued her tirade, she began moving closer to Thunder's pen. The massive bull was watching her with interest, his head raised, clearly aware of the aggressive energy she was projecting. Thunder had been trained for exhibitions where he would demonstrate controlled responses to various stimuli. He knew how to react to aggressive posturing, sudden movements, and threatening behavior. But he had always been in controlled environments with professional handlers who understood his training. Karen did not understand anything about Thunder except that she feared him. But her need to prove her dominance over us was stronger than her fear. "I am going to prove once and for all how dangerous that animal is," she declared, marching toward Thunder's pen. I continued filming, knowing that whatever happened next would be the result of Karen's own choices and actions. I had not encouraged her, had not provoked her, had not done anything except document her trespassing and aggressive behavior. Karen reached Thunder's pen and began examining the gate. The bull watched her carefully, his massive head tracking her movements. Thunder was not aggressive, but he was alert, aware that someone was behaving in a threatening manner near his territory. "This gate is not even properly secured," Karen announced, apparently trying to justify what she was about to do. "I am going to show everyone how unsafe this really is." That was when Karen made the fatal mistake that would cost her everything. She grabbed the gate latch and began trying to open Thunder's pen. Thunder had been trained to respond to unauthorized attempts to open his enclosure. In exhibition settings, this training helped handlers maintain control. But Karen was not a handler, and this was not an exhibition. The moment Karen touched that gate latch, Thunder responded with the full force of his training and instincts. He charged toward the gate with 1,200 pounds of controlled power, his massive frame moving with surprising speed and precision. Karen saw the bull charging toward her and stumbled backward in panic. Her expensive shoes slipped on the gravel, and she fell backward directly into the side of her own SUV. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent sharp pain through her ribs. But Thunder was not finished. The gate that Karen had been trying to open was now damaged from her tampering, and Thunder's momentum carried him through the weakened barrier. What happened next was like watching a force of nature unleash itself on the symbol of everything Karen valued. Thunder began systematically destroying Karen's pristine SUV with methodical precision. The bull's massive head dented the hood beyond repair. His horns punched holes through the windshield like it was made of paper. Each movement was controlled and deliberate, as if Thunder understood exactly what he was doing. Karen was screaming and trying to crawl away from her demolished vehicle, but every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her broken ribs. She had fallen hard against her own SUV when Thunder charged, and the impact had cracked several ribs. Thunder continued his destruction of the SUV, crushing the roof, shattering the windows, and reducing the expensive vehicle to a pile of twisted metal and broken glass. Each dent and scratch represented months of harassment visited upon an innocent family. I continued filming the entire incident, documenting how Karen's illegal trespassing and gate tampering had triggered the whole sequence of events. The video would show clearly that I had not commanded Thunder to attack or encourage the destruction in any way. Karen's injuries were the direct result of her own panicked reaction to the situation she had created. Thunder had not attacked her. She had injured herself while trying to escape the consequences of her own actions. The systematic destruction of her SUV was simply Thunder responding to perceived threats in the way he had been trained. Karen's aggressive behavior, her unauthorized gate tampering, and her presence on our property had created the perfect storm of circumstances. As Thunder finally calmed down and returned to his pen, Karen lay on the ground beside the wreckage of her vehicle, moaning in pain and calling for help. The symbol of her wealth and status had been reduced to scrap metal by the very animal she had tried to have removed. Justice had been served, not by human revenge, but by natural consequences delivered with devastating precision. Karen had finally learned that some forces cannot be bullied, threatened, or bought off. The bull she had feared most had taught her the lesson she needed to learn. Actions have consequences, and some consequences cannot be avoided through lawyers and litigation. The sound of sirens filled the air as emergency responders arrived at our ranch. They found Karen lying beside the twisted wreckage of her SUV, clutching her ribs and moaning in pain. The scene told the entire story without any explanation needed. The paramedics immediately began treating Karen for her broken ribs, while the police started their investigation. I handed over my phone with the complete video documentation of everything that had happened. "She was trespassing on your property?" the lead officer asked, reviewing the footage. "Yes, sir," I replied. "She parked illegally on our land and then began tampering with our animal enclosures. Everything is on the video." The video evidence was devastating to Karen's case. It showed her illegal trespassing, her aggressive behavior, her attempts to open Thunder's pen, and the natural consequences that followed. There was no question about who was responsible for the incident. Karen's expensive lawyers arrived at the hospital expecting to file massive lawsuits against us. Instead, they discovered that their client's criminal behavior had invalidated all of her insurance claims and legal threats. "You were trespassing and tampering with agricultural equipment," her lead attorney explained to her. "Your insurance company will not cover damages that occurred during illegal activities, and the video evidence makes any lawsuit against the ranch impossible to pursue." The police investigation revealed the full extent of Karen's harassment campaign. They found evidence of repeated trespassing, property damage, and harassment that had been building for months. Karen faced criminal charges for trespassing, attempted vandalism, and harassment. Meanwhile, the community began learning the truth about what had really been happening. The video of Karen's trespassing and the resulting incident spread quickly through our rural area. People who had believed her lies about our ranch began to understand who the real problem had been. Our longtime neighbors rallied around our family, offering support and sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment attempts. Several people came forward with evidence of her lies and false complaints. We knew she was trouble from the start, one neighbor told the local newspaper. She tried to get everyone to sign complaints about things that were perfectly legal. We should have spoken up sooner. Karen's criminal charges proceeded through the court system, while her civil case against us collapsed entirely. Her lawyer withdrew from the case after reviewing the video evidence, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. The financial impact on Karen was devastating. Her insurance company refused to cover the destruction of her SUV because it occurred during criminal trespassing. The cost of replacing her vehicle, combined with her medical bills and legal fees, created a financial burden she had not expected. More importantly, Karen's reputation in the community was destroyed. Everyone now knew the truth about her harassment campaign and the lies she had spread about our family. The social consequences were more painful to her than the physical ones. Danny's recovery progressed steadily during this time. Seeing Karen face real consequences for her actions seemed to help him heal emotionally as well as physically. He no longer looked over his shoulder fearfully when doing his chores. "Is she going to keep bothering us, Dad?" Danny asked one day. "No, son," I replied with confidence. "She learned her lesson." The county fair that summer was particularly special. Danny had recovered enough to participate, and Thunder performed beautifully in the exhibition ring. The crowd applauded not just for Thunder's strength and training, but for our family's perseverance through difficult times. Karen's house went up for sale 2 months after the incident. She had become a pariah in the community, facing criminal charges and social isolation. Her dream of controlling a rural neighborhood had turned into a nightmare of legal problems and financial ruin. The day the moving truck arrived at Karen's house, I felt a sense of closure that I had not expected. Watching her belongings loaded into boxes, I realized that justice had truly been served. She was leaving our community the same way she had arrived, alone and angry, but now with the added burden of understanding that actions have consequences. Karen's departure marked the end of the harassment that had plagued our family for months. Our ranch returned to its peaceful routine, with Danny helping with the chores and Thunder grazing contentedly in his pasture. The incident had taught our entire community an important lesson about standing up to bullies and the importance of supporting neighbors who were being targeted by harassment. Karen's tactics had worked in other places because people had been afraid to confront her behavior directly. Thunder became something of a local legend, the bull who had stood up to the neighborhood bully and won. People would drive by just to see the animal who had delivered such perfect justice. Sometimes the system fails to protect good people from bad actors. Sometimes wealth and connections can twist justice into injustice. But sometimes, natural consequences provide the perfect correction for unacceptable behavior. Karen had learned that some forces cannot be bullied, bought, or intimidated. She had finally met something she could not control or manipulate, and that encounter had taught her the lesson she needed to learn about respecting boundaries and treating others with decency. Our ranch was peaceful again, our family was healing, and justice had been served by the most unlikely of heroes. A 1,200-pound bull named Thunder, who had simply responded to aggression the way nature intended.